Okay, hold up just a minute. I'm going to put you guys. Okay. Okay, you all see the MCQ page? This is going to be laid out slightly differently than the layout of the link I gave you earlier today. And this one does not have the answers marked, which will be helpful. I'm going to put you guys down below. And we will get going. More people are coming in. This is the place to be. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look here. I wonder if I can get rid of this stuff. Does anyone know how I can get rid of, like, I can just show the things instead of showing all this stuff at the top? There we go. That's better. Okay. So let's start right in on the first one, just because I think it has a lot of interesting things to talk about. I'm sure we won't get through all the questions, but we're going to get through as much as we can. Okay, so what's the first thing you look at here? Or you should look at here?
The date on the text, so you know if it's a primary or secondary document.
Right, and we can tell right away if they're talking about the French and Indian War and the date was 2005, you can tell primary document or secondary document. What do you think, Helen? Oh, some people.
This is a secondary document.
Secondary document. Hi, Ashwin. Good to see you. Secondary document, right. Whoop. Right. Okay. So this is a historian, Fred Anderson. I think I own this book and I was going to try to find it, but I didn't. Okay. So let's see. How about Zoe? Can you read this for us? The last sentence, read with great punch. Okay. Take it away, Zoe.
Do you want me to just read the last sentence or the whole thing?
The whole thing. It's not
okay. Today, 250 years after the French and Indian War, most Americans are no more familiar with its events and significance than they are with those of the Peloponnesian War. Do you know that George Washington struck the first spark of a war that set the British North American frontier ablaze from the Carolinas to Nova Scotia, then spread to Europe, Canada, the Caribbean, West Africa, India, and finally the Philippines? Historians call this immense conflict the 7 Years' War. Winston Churchill described it as the First World War.
Right, because it really is going all over the world. I don't know, maybe someone could look up someone who doesn't like to talk out loud too much, but who has good Googling skills, and look up Philippines and the 7 Years' War and then get back to us. Hey, Ephraim. Because I don't know, I know nothing about that, and I bet nobody else here knows anything about that either. But that's kind of interesting that even that really is going all over the world. Who knows about the Peloponnesian War? Anything about that? Did you all read that and say, yeah, I sure don't know anything about that? Harriet.
Yeah, I was gonna say in this homeschooler crowd.
Yeah, you homeschool crowd, all you kids who do Latin and ancient Greek and all this, you might know. So Harriet, what do you know briefly? Did you know a little something about the Peloponnesian War?
Yeah, I kind of knew the general time frame, but when I read that, I re-looked it up because I wanted to be the sort of person who knew what the Peloponnesian War was.
Good.
Which was that war between Athens and Sparta. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh yeah, duh, I forgot.
Oh yeah, that war, the Athens Sparta thing.
Oh yeah.
Very
so
good.
last year.
Very good. Yeah, I always think, you homeschool kids, you'll know a little bit about that. Okay, very good. And yeah, I think this thing, Winston Churchill describing it as the First World War, is really good. I was just saying to somebody in responding to their LEQ over the weekend that, the French and Indian War is sometimes referred to, some historians call it the First World War, but I really didn't know it was Churchill who might have been the first to describe it that way. Okay, so let's look. Okay, question 1. And what I want you to do on this one is to tell me which answers are wrong but really did happen, but they're just not the correct answer? Which answers are wrong and they never happened? And then which answer is right? Okay, so which of the following best explains a result of the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War? A, France sold the Louisiana Territory to Britain. B, Great Britain gained a claim to land extending to the Mississippi River. C, Great Britain and Spain established an alliance. D, British influence over its North American colonies decreased. So how would you, which of these are wrong? The wrong answer, but might have happened. Okay, Ephraim?
So the ones that are like completely wrong first is France sold the Louisiana Territory. That's absolutely wrong.
Yeah, Great Britain, right.
B, I think did happen. They did get land extending to the Mississippi, but that's just not really the main point the question the writers want you to answer. C is also wrong, if I can remember, because that just didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then D would make the most sense for this one because
How would you argue that?
because after the French and Indian War, because of the years of salutary neglect, the American colonists began to develop their own ideal, like there's a sense of like nationalism that separates themselves from Great Britain, and they create a self-governing identity that wants to separate from Britain due to like their new tax policies and other grievances.
Okay, you're making an interesting argument here, but some people might have another way of looking at it. Let's hear from Indra.
I mean, in a more long-term way, it did decrease because the colonies just became America. But I don't think that's really what the question is talking about. The most direct thing is gaining a claim to land extending to the Mississippi River because they divided up the French territories when they lost the war.
Mhm.
I'm not totally sure about C. Like, I don't know anything about that off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And the Louisiana territory was sold, but not to Great Britain.
Right. And it's going to be a little bit in the future. And yeah, I think your point, Indra, is that explains a result of the 7 Years' War, like kind of a direct result of the 7 Years' War. Ephraim is kind of looking at the long term. And that's always a tricky thing about some of these MCQs, that if you know a lot and you might be thinking big picture, you could make a good argument that this is the way you could look at it. And it can be tricky and sometimes seem kind of arbitrary. But why do I think that's a better answer, you know? Does anyone else have any thought on why? Because Indra is correct. B is the right answer. Does anyone else have any thought on that, Helen?
I would just say that I think B is the correct one because the proclamation of 1763 said they couldn't go past the Appalachian Mountains, which is sort of by the Mississippi River.
Well,
But I need to work on my geography.
Not really. It's really
Yeah,
way
but then
over.
also I think that right after the French and Indian War, the
Mhm.
British influence over the colonies increased for a period when they
Mhm.
started
tried
taxing
to
them more
increase
and
it,
paying
yeah.
attention. So that's why I think B is correct.
Mhm.
Ignore my geography skills. I'm really bad at geography.
Yeah, yeah. Just you check a map or relief maps. It shows the Allegheny Mountains. It was really much more. It'd be like I live in Western Pennsylvania, and I'm on the west side of the Appalachian Mountains, but I'm not really near to the Mississippi River. So yeah, it's the mountain range on the eastern part of the colonies. But that was the frontier in that day. You know, that's a good point, Helen, in a sense that the frontier keeps moving west. It keeps moving west. It's not like this is the frontier, this is the west. It's always going to be shifting. Okay. Yeah, so that one, I think, you know, I wish if they'd phrased it a direct result, I think the question would have been clearer. Would you agree? I think if you were editing that question.
I realized that I did choose B, but I didn't I forgot what the passage was truly about.
Well, that's okay. That's good. Wait, that you brought up a good point, and you brought up you know, a lot of these I've often thought that some of these MCQs could be great discussion questions and could be argued several ways, but usually there is one answer that's right. Okay, let's look at number 2. Britain's victory in the 7 Years' War had which of the following economic, here you probably would want to highlight that, economic consequences for its American colonies? British government granted certain American colonists a monopoly on the fur trade without French competition. Some of these, I wanted you to think if some of them were kind of like alternative history, like, gosh, that would have been nice. Hi, Sarah, good to see you. And which are not. Okay. B, the British government paid for the construction of canals to encourage trade between the Great Lakes region and the East Coast. C, the British government increased taxation of colonial goods to help pay off the debt created by the war. D, the British government forced American merchants to supply the British Royal Navy without payment. Okay, we've got Sebastian here. What do you think?
Yeah,
Sebastian?
well, I've actually not heard of any of A, B, or D. And following the old MCQ, one of these things is not like the other principle,
Right.
and the fact that it's the most boring and generic answer, I'm
Right.
pretty sure that's the right one. As far as I know, there weren't really any big canal projects in the US till the 19th century and the construction of the Erie Canal and so forth.
Erie Canal, and there were a lot of other canals too. The Erie Canal is just the most well-known one, but yeah, there were a lot of canals. Yeah, so that was more like the 1820s, 1830s. And then of course, railroads kind of put most of the canals out of business. But yeah, and even then, like this was kind of an interesting one to me. The British government paid for the construction of canals. And with the Erie Canal, which did that, connected the Great Lakes over to the East Coast. But do you think the federal government paid for the Erie Canal?
Not if they could help it.
No, the federal government wouldn't pay a penny. And New York State paid for it in private money and all that, but they wouldn't. That will become a big issue in the early 19th century of who should the government get involved in this sort of stuff. And yeah, so good. Yeah, the generic, like, oh yeah, taxes, right. Debt of the war. Okay, let's move on. Okay, the conclusion of the 7 Years' War, which had which of the following effects on Native American societies? A, Native Americans allied with Great Britain gained the right to become British citizens, angering the colonists. B, British and French officials agreed to force Native Americans to move to reservations west of the Mississippi River. C, Native Americans gained control of all of the Western fur trade with British colonists. D, the British government attempted to restrict Western settlement to reduce tensions between colonists and Native Americans. How about Harriet? Let's hear you, and then we've got Indra and Tabitha. Okay, Harriet, take it away.
Okay, I know I got this one right, but it's been a while, so I could be wrong. So I would say I don't remember anything about A, and it just feels a little bit too complicated to be correct.
Right.
B, the Native Americans were like forced to move west, but it wasn't by the British and the French, and it wasn't like a consequence of the 7 Years' War. C, I happen to know that like the French did a lot of fur trading. So after the 7 Years' War, if the French suddenly didn't have as much control or any really control in America, then their fur traders would probably be gone. And so the British could trade. That one felt right. And then D, the brother. Shucks.
Do you like D even more?
I liked even more. Yeah, never mind. So C was stretching too far. D is boring and very accurate, but C could be argued.
Yeah, so this could be called find the boring straight answer, and that'll be the one. Yeah, some of these are like, these ones, either they didn't happen in this time period, they didn't happen because of these people, you know, like the forcing Native Americans to really move west of the Mississippi River. That's going to be under President Andrew Jackson coming up this next unit. Yeah, I think C, I agree with you. Would you all agree that this would be the most tempting answer if you didn't read D? That's a good indication of, be sure you read all the answers, because if you go for one without reading all of them, there might have been one you would have liked more. Right. And what's the law that the British government did? How did they attempt to restrict Western settlement? Sonnet.
Proclamation.
The
Of-
proclamation
yeah.
of 1763, right, which we have had some MCQ TTs about. So great. That is why I do many of the documents or MCQ TTs I do, because these are topics that always come up. Okay, they are important. Okay, very good. Okay, moving along. Okay. Oh, this is an interesting one. So first we look down here. Who's this guy? And what sort of document are we looking at here? Sonnet.
The primary document,
Mhm.
sometime around, it's either British or like American colonist.
Mhm. Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because he was American, and he at first in like 1760, he became a British official, like an appointed British official. He was born in, I think he was born in the Boston area or around Boston. But he got a job as a British official, British appointed official. And in about a year, he switched sides, and he was a lawyer, and he began representing American, more patriotic things. So he's kind of flipped sides. So yeah, he's definitely for the American patriotic cause here in a very early voice. He's an interesting person. Has anyone ever heard of Mercy Otis Warren? Good, Tabitha. What do you know about her?
I know that she was his James Otis's wife. I think
No, not his
she
wife. She
wrote.
was his sister. She was his
Oh, she was his sister.
sister.
Got that part mixed up. I know that she
Close.
wrote plays and poetry that were
Mhm.
pretty famous in the colonies.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, she wrote
She-
like satiric plays during the Revolution, supporting the Patriots. And then, does anyone know what?
I think that she also married a James, if I'm correct. Because I read someone's biography of her on like someone old from the class website, and she definitely married someone named James. So I give Tabitha credit because
Mhm.
her husband probably was also
James.
James.
Yeah.
Yeah.
James Warren. So she was Mercy Otis Warren was her last name, and her new last name. And yeah, he was very active in patriotic circles, and she was also. And she was, I mean, a lot of times, yeah, I've had a lot of past biography essays written about her. She's a very interesting character. She was a mother of about 5 kids, but she was also right in there with all the patriot discussions. And then she eventually, in like, oh, God, I want to say 1800, it was, a little bit, I think it was a little bit after Washington's time as president. She wrote and published a whole history of the revolution. But by that time, she really didn't like the new Constitution. So she was kind of an anti-federalist point of view on things. It's quite interesting. But yeah, she also wrote a lot of plays. So anyway, she's the sister of this guy. He's kind of interesting because he had it's described as bouts of insanity at various points in his life where people thought he was kind of crazy. And then he got into some sort of altercation, like that became a physical thing, with a British customs official in Boston, and got clonkered on the head with something like a shovel or something like that. And after that, he really lost his mind. So maybe he already had some propensity towards not being quite in his right mind all the time. And then that really sent him over the ledge, and he was, you know, basically insane for the rest of his life. He died in 1783, right at the end of the war. I don't know if you saw the treaty come out, being hit. I mean, how many people do you know that this has happened to them? He got hit by lightning while standing in his doorway to his home. So that's how the poor guy died. So it's kind of a sad story towards the end of his life, but he really wrote a lot and he was very, very active. So let's experiment with just going down to the questions. So we kind of know, okay, he's a big patriot guy. Okay. So let's see if even without reading the document, because there was a question about that from Zoe earlier, like, do we have to read the documents? Can we just start in? So let's go here and we'll see if we need to go back. Okay. In the excerpt, Otis was responding to which of the following developments? Now here, if you just look at the year, you might be able to tell. Okay. A, the publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. B, the threat of French invasion of British North America. C, the introduction of widespread boycotts against imported British goods. D, the British government's attempts to pay for the costs of the 7 Years' War. What do you think, Ephraim?
It's D.
D.
Yeah, that would make the most sense.
It makes the most sense, right, right. Why can't it be Thomas Paine's Common Sense that he's
Because
connecting to?
That's published like 10 years later.
Yes.
Like more than 10 years later. That's
Right, a
right
little more
before
than
the
10 years later, right? Because that's 1776. And, you know, it's always good to have a few dates that you can really like hook on to and know. And knowing that Common Sense was early in the year before July 4th, 1776 is really a helpful date to know. Yeah, and the threat of French invasion, not then, the French had now been thrown out. And there wasn't yet a widespread boycott against British imported goods. Okay, so we successfully did that one without reading the document. Let's see how we do on this one. Which of the following was a major purpose of Otis's pamphlet? A, to recruit foreign allies to support the claims of the colonists against Great Britain. B, to encourage opposition to Parliament's regulation of colonial commerce. C, to propose a plan to send colonial delegates to sit in Parliament. D, to advocate for colonial independence from Great Britain. Ephraim has got his hand up again. And Ashwin, let me hear from Ashwin and then we'll do you, Ephraim, okay? Ashwin.
Sure. So A doesn't really, okay, so like given like the actual document, we can kind of rule out C. We can also tell that D is not really a popular opinion at the time. So and the document doesn't really go for that. So we can eliminate C and D. A also doesn't really count because the audience that you can see from that is the American colonists. So that kind of leaves B. And also that the document is literally just opposing the regulations. So it's B.
Huh. Good, good, very good. Okay, so yeah, B, and we've heard about this before, regulation, colonial commerce, right? They're trying to tax, they're trying to enforce those old navigation acts, all that. Great. Okay, let's look. Here's another question about this one. By the 1770s, to which of the following groups would Otis's argument that the colonies must obey Parliament most appeal? Okay, so he wrote this in 1764. And now they're asking for, is there any change over time? What do you think? Well, let's get Ephraim and then Helen. Okay, Ephraim, do you have a thought on this
Oh,
one?
I wasn't raised my hand, but
Okay.
I'll say it's B because all the other ones are more patriotic rather than loyalistic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's saying they must, we have to be patient. We have to try to work through the legal channels and all that. Do you have any thoughts, Helen, for their thoughts?
Yeah, I would also say B, just because I don't think enslaved people they weren't really they weren't trying to figure out parliament and stuff. They were more occupied with their jobs and labor and freedom.
Mhm.
And then artisans, there's nothing really, I never really read anything about artisans particular protesting. They might have, but I just don't know. Farmers, I doubt the farmers would like obeying parliament. So that, and then the loyalists were in favor of staying with Britain. So I think the must obey parliament would most appeal to them.
Yeah, an argument about obeying. And again, so this was a good example, Zoe, that sometimes you can indeed get all the answers. I mean, we've all done these before, but you know, that you can work through them without reading the documents. And if you need to, you can always go back. But it can also, again, be helpful to read the question and then read the document, because then in a sense, you know what you're looking for. Okay. Let's move on. Do you want to do the John Locke ones, or were these ones pretty obvious to you all? Can we skip the John Locke ones? Would that be okay? Anyone else agree with Harriet and me? Okay, I think you're all pretty good on John Locke. It was interesting to just look at and to keep in mind that John Locke, whoops, where is this? John Locke was writing a long time before our revolution, like, you know, like almost 90 years before. But these ideas were still ideas of great interest, you know, and they really resonated with the colonists all through this time period. So they're all, these ideas are percolating down, and they'd had a lot of time to percolate down. But yeah, let's skip these for now, because we've got some further on that I think would be more. Oh, this one is very interesting, and I've got some interesting background info on this. This is a petition to the Massachusetts State Legislature in 1777. What's happening around then? What are we in the midst of? Just in general. Ephraim. Take it away, Ephraim.
The war has started, and Jefferson has published. The war has started, and Jefferson already published his Declaration of Independence. Those are the two main, like,
right.
And also the patriot identity of like liberty for all.
Right.
And that's what's and that's what influences the slaves to say what they say.
Right. And one thing was in this one about John Locke, which I thought was kind of interesting, because this set of questions kind of deflates. It would make you think another answer. Let's just look at this one question about the John Locke. The excerpt from Locke's two treatises of government could best be used as evidence by historians studying which of the following topics. And the correct answer is the boring one, A, the impact of the Enlightenment on revolutionary political thought. Like if historians were studying that, they would want to be very familiar with Locke's work. But one of the answers was the attempts by African Americans to seek freedom during the American Revolution. And that's considered a wrong answer. But again, this idea that sometimes these questions could be better as discussion questions, because this next set, you can see a lot of Locke's ideas in here in this writing. And I think the person who wrote this, and I know who it was, you probably all have never heard of him. His name, the writer of this, was a free Black whose name was Prince Hall. And he was a free Black. And I was wondering tonight, I mean, I'd heard about him, I'd known about him, I've read some other things by him. But I was wondering, like, okay, so he's a free Black in Massachusetts. How did he get up here? And where'd he come from? How did he get free? Like, had he been enslaved? Or what?
Sorry, what did you say his name was?
Prince Hall, like prince and princess, king and queen. Prince is his first name. Prince Hall. His name is after his father. He was, interestingly enough, he was kind of like a John. Alexander Hamilton type character. Where was Alexander Hamilton born? Indra, you can
West
say.
Indies. Thank you, Hamilton.
Yes. Okay. Yes, he was born in the West Indies. So was Prince Hall. And he was born to an interracial couple, which was not illegal in those islands. So he was born, his mother was a free Black woman who probably had a little, was half white or something. And she was married, or at least, I think they were married to this white man. And Prince Hall was their son. And they were doing very well. They were well respected and everything was fine down there in the islands. But this Prince Hall was obviously very, very bright, very early on, kind of like Alexander Hamilton. Oh, hi, Julian, you're here, great. And he wanted to go to America, to the colonies. And he kept begging him, pleading. He finally hops on board a ship when he's 17. So again, it kind of reminds me a lot of Alexander Hamilton, coming from a pretty disadvantaged family in the Caribbean, and not from, from a split up family, not from an intact family, but was incredibly bright and made it up to the US or to America, and then made his way. So this Prince Hall was a little bit like that, the Black version of that. And he had been an apprentice with his father who worked in leather. So he had a manual skill, and he used that for a number of years. He then became a minister. There was starting to be some Black denominations of Protestant churches. He was a minister in one of those. And he also, have any of you ever heard of the Masons? Have you ever heard of the Masons are? Not the stone cutters, but the Masons as a sort of society. You've heard of them, Joshua? Good. He wanted to join the Masons, and he wanted other free Blacks in Boston, the Boston area, to join the Masons. And do you think they were allowed? This is pre-revolution. No, they were not allowed. And somebody's got someone talking in the background. I don't know if that's Indra, do you think that's it? Okay. Thank you. And so again, it's always fine to have your microphone unmuted if you know it's quiet at your house, but if you know there's noise, and come on when you come on. But he started up a Black Masons group. And when the American local Masons wouldn't allow him to join, he applied to England, interestingly enough. This is right before the revolution, and got permission from them to start an African Mason lodge, and he became the head of it. So he was quite a big wig, and he okay, let's read his document, because I think it's an interesting one. Who would like to read this? How about Sebastian? Can you read this with enthusiasm?
Sure. Petition to the Massachusetts State Legislature, 1777. The petition of a great number of Blacks detained in a state of slavery in the bowels of a free and Christian country humbly showeth that your petitioners apprehend that they have in common with all other men a natural and inalienable right to that freedom which the great parent of the universe hath bestowed equally on all mankind. They were unjustly dragged by the hand of cruel power from a populous, pleasant, and plentiful country, and in violation of laws of nature and of nations. Your petitioners cannot but express their astonishment that it has never been considered that every principle from which America has acted in the course of their unhappy difficulties with Great Britain pleads stronger than 1,000 arguments in favor of your petitioners. They therefore humbly beseech your honors to give this petition its due weight and consideration, and cause an act of the legislature to be passed, whereby they may be restored to the enjoyments of that which is the natural right of all men, and their children who are born in this land of liberty may not be held as slaves after they arrive at the age of 21 years.
What does that sound like after the age of 21 years. I think we talked about this before.
It's gradual manumission.
Yeah, it sounds like gradual emancipation, doesn't it? This is an instance where sometimes we have to be grateful we don't get what we're asking for. Because if they had said, oh, that's a great idea. You're right. This really violates things. So we'll pass a law, just as you say, so that anyone who's born a slave now, by the time they're 21, they can be free. Okay, great idea. We love it. Because anyone know what happened in Massachusetts just a few years later, like, by 1880, 1883, what had happened in Massachusetts regarding slavery? Tabitha, do you know something?
I believe it was banned entirely, right?
It was banned entirely. And it was like a Supreme Court of Massachusetts decision that, there were some people going through the courts and, enslaved people were putting forth petitions. And finally, the Supreme Court justice in Massachusetts, not the national government doesn't exist. And they said, our new Constitution that had been written by John Adams, none other than John Adams, which had language like John Locke saying that everyone is born free and equal, we have these rights. He said, this is stating clearly right here that we cannot have slavery. And they abolished slavery then and there. So if Prince Hall had gotten what he wanted in 1777, it might have been many years before the whole thing had been done away with in Massachusetts. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so now we go down here to the questions. The first paragraph of the excerpt, so we have to go back to see what that one is, makes the claim that A, slavery should encourage religious conversion to Christianity. B, concepts of independence should apply only to white men. C, all people should have the same inherent liberties. D, the ideals of the American Revolution should also apply to other nations. Sarah, how about you?
Well, immediately, I'm seeing C as being the most fitting answer for the first paragraph because they're talking about natural and inalienable rights.
Right.
It's strongly reminiscent of the Declaration of Independence. So,
which has already been out now for 6 months. And I'm sure Prince Hall would have read it. And it also sounds like John Locke stuff, doesn't it? So, yeah, everything together. You know what? In the first paragraph, do you see this thing about, they were unjustly dragged by the hands of cruel power from a populous, pleasant, and plentiful country? By that, he's referring to Africa, right? From Africa. And an interesting thing, I did not know he did this, but when I was looking up stuff tonight, I found that a few years later, in 1787, the same year as a major new document in the US, what document?
Sorry, what year?
1787. Major new governing document.
Constitution, of course.
Yeah, the Constitution. Great, good. Ashwin wrote that down too. And so in 1787, he put forward to probably the legislature or the courts in Massachusetts, once again, he was working locally, something he called the Boston Plan. And it was a go back to Africa plan. He said, we want to go back home. Not that he had ever lived in Africa. He was born in Barbados, but he thought Blacks should be able to go back to Africa and that the legislature should pay for it. They should pay for their shipping them over, give them tools and implements, and that would be it. And then it would be much better. Sebastian?
And it did actually, like I did a history in the news a few weeks ago about one of George Washington's slaves, Harry Washington, who joined a colony who ran away, joined the British, and later joined a colony at Sierra Leone.
Oh,
And
neat.
ironically, started a revolution there.
Yeah.
But there,
He knows
there
all about a
also-
revolution, so.
There also was the colony of the country of Liberia, which, if any of you have a map handy, is on the coast of West Africa. It's the only African country that was never colonized,
Right.
and it was originally founded by freed black slaves. I don't know if it was after the Revolutionary War, maybe after
It was
the Civil War.
that, and we'll be
That was-
coming to that in, let's see, in 2 weeks, like not this week, but next week. We have an MCQ TT on the Colonization Society. And that's also going to be the foundation of our next document discussion in 2 weeks from tonight. And I'm going to bring in more of this stuff about Prince Hall and his earlier plan. So I was astonished to find that Blacks were promoting this, because the Colonization Society is largely becomes taken over by white people saying, yeah, this is the solution to our problems. We'll just send them all back to Africa. And then can you just imagine a little preview of 2 weeks from now, but can you imagine what might be some problems that could be associated with, okay, yeah, great idea. We'll send all the slaves back to Africa. Great. It sounds wonderful. What might be a problem, Tabitha?
Well, one thing that occurred to me is who is paying for this.
Yeah, the paying, just like Prince Hall here in his Boston plan petition, he's partly saying to the state legislature, okay, and of course you're going to pay for it, right? Because that would be expensive. And are they just going to do it out of the goodness of their heart? You know, can be tricky. Joshua?
It would create a lot of unrest in Africa, which they might not necessarily be concerned about the people, but about the trade going on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are the people who actually have still been living in Africa think about these new, who they would kind of view as colonists coming in, who probably don't know the language, don't know the farming skills or the customs of that region. And they're probably going to be, there was usually a missionary aspect to it, and Prince Hall and his Boston plan, that was part of it. I mean, he was a minister himself. We'll spread Christianity. This will be good. And, maybe the African people wouldn't like that. I mean, the country of Liberia has probably rarely had peace ever since the Colonization Society got busy and started sending American Blacks over there. They've had horrible civil wars all through their history, and tensions between, okay, this new group who's come over and they say they're Africans. Well, they're not really Africans, and they don't speak our language. They don't have our customs. They want to do things the way it was done over in the United States. I mean, it's a mess, and it's really tricky. Joshua and then Indra.
Well, they also, I'm pretty sure, and this is the same with some countries in the Middle East, but they don't actually consider the modern day borders as their own borders. I'm sure back then there were no countries so much as tribes or cultures. So dropping off like a ship full of slaves over at a warring opposing tribe could be a death sentence for all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Harriet?
I mean, it's kind of like if you asked everyone from the US who was like, I don't know, Polish descent, that just like sent them all back to Poland, like that'd be a bad idea. Because like, I think at that point they were so like American already, or many of them, that like, if you sent them back to Africa, that's not actually like their culture or where they were from, while their culture like retains some aspects of like their, great grandparents or whatever who did live there. I think it's like, I don't know.
Right.
Like that.
Indra, and then I've got a little story to tell. Indra.
I I mean, yeah, enslavement was passed down in families. So you probably have kids whose ancestors, like grandparents, great grandparents, were the first people to be brought over. And then you've got how bad the Middle Passage was, and probably the conditions not being good, shipping these people back to Africa.
Right.
Like, it just would have been
Okay,
a total
pack them in
nightmare.
again. Right. Right. Yeah, you've all seen those pictures probably. It's like a looking down in a ship, a slave ship, and you see all these slaves lined up like sardines in it. And has anyone seen that? Do you know what I'm referring to? And it is a very famous image. It was actually, I think I might have mentioned this before, that it was actually, this is the improved conditions. This is like giving them all more space. See, they can all lie down. That was the good version at the time. Now we look at it and say, oh my gosh, how horrible. But yet they couldn't do that on this ride back if they're ostensibly bringing these formerly enslaved people to freedom in their homeland. They can't, they've got to have a little bit better accommodations. And yeah, this is going to be very hard to pay for. So yeah, it's going to have lots of, it's a very interesting issue. But I had no idea that Prince Hall was involved with this early on. Okay, let's look at this. The second paragraph of the excerpt proposes that the Massachusetts legislature should, like, what should they do? A, allow enslaved Africans to serve in the state's militia. B, find a way to resolve its conflicts with Britain peacefully. C, write a constitution explaining how natural rights apply to enslaved people. D, abolish slavery and release enslaved African Americans upon adulthood. Which one, Julianne? Want to say something there? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now I can. A little, maybe just talk loudly because somehow that's not coming through too clearly.
Let me fix it. Okay, can you hear me now?
That's better.
I feel like you could automatically skip to D because it clearly proposes that when they hit 21, then they're free.
Right.
In the second paragraph.
Exactly. Very good. Yeah, so that's what he's asking for. But again, lucky that he didn't get it. Lucky that they didn't go along with that, or they might have been like all the other states in the North that put in those gradual emancipation things. Okay, now here, which of the following describes an overall argument of the excerpt? A, slavery is not economically important for the northern colonies. B, slavery is contrary to the ideals of the American Revolution. C, enslaved Africans should be rewarded for their loyalty to Great Britain. D, enslaved Africans should be returned to Africa. What do you think, Indra?
I mean, this one's like really simple. I feel like there's not even one that's like kind of right. It's B. I mean, I remember a lot of the Heimler videos back when I took world history talked about how like contrary the ideals of the Enlightenment and like all of these revolutions were to then like the very inhumane, not natural rights at all things of slavery. Yeah, B.
Yep, B is pretty quick. But of course, if you happen to know, like I've just told you tonight, that the same guy who wrote this petition also wrote a petition wanting slaves or former slaves to be returned to Africa, you could be confused, you could be confused. So I don't mean to confuse you here, kids, just showing you the complexities of history. And maybe the people who wrote this question did not know that he had written that. Okay. Let's skip this one. Let's go to, okay, this one was a secondary source, a historian, a good one. I have a book by him. But let's move on. We might come back to that. And look at this one. Okay. So this is Alexander Hamilton. So someone can sing this if you want, you know, you can, it might be some of the lyrics, I don't know. Let's see, who would like to read this with clarity? Sonnet.
The whole thing from
Yeah,
like,
well, oh, let's look, when was it written? Let's read the whole, we read
Oh.
Alexander Hamilton, but when did he write it? What is this that we're looking?
the Federalist Paper number 15, published in 1787.
Yeah, does anyone know the purposes of the Federalist Papers?
I'm pretty sure it was to convince the people to ratify the new constitution.
Especially in the state of New York, where he lived. Yeah, that's why it was an argument for the Constitution. Right, very good. Okay, so now take it away, Sonnet. See if you can read this.
The United States, under the Articles of Confederation, has an indefinite discretion to make requests for men and money, but they have no authority to raise either by regulations extending to the individual citizens of America. The consequence of this is that though in theory their resolutions concerning those objects are laws, constitutionally binding on the members of the Union, yet in practice they are mere recommendations which the states observe or disregard at their option. There's nothing absurd or impractical between independent nations for certain defined purposes, depending for its execution on the good faith of the parties. In the early part of the present century, there was an enthusiasm in Europe for leagues or alliances. They were scarcely formed before they were broken, giving an instructive but afflicting lesson to mankind, how little dependence is to be placed on treaties which have no other sanction than the obligations of good faith. There was a time when we were told that breaches by the states of the regulations of the Confederation's authority were not to be expected. In our case, the agreement of the 13 distinct sovereign wills is requisite under the Confederation to the complete execution of every important measure that proceeds from the Union. The measures of the Union have not been executed. Each state, yielding to the persuasive voice of immediate interest or inconvenience, has successively withdrawn its support.
Right. So yeah, he's arguing that the Articles of Confederation were pretty bad. You know what? This actually does relate to this earlier one, because he's talking here about the Declaration of Independence. And he says it was actually a declaration by 13 United States of America, proclaiming them as free and independent states. And what he's really emphasizing in this passage is independent states from one another, not just free and independent from Britain. He's saying they're free and independent from each other. They're completely equal. They're separate states, okay? Because the word state and nation were kind of synonyms. So it's this kind of relates, because that's what Hamilton is bringing up here. Okay, so let's go into the questions. Which of the following claims did Hamilton make in the excerpt about the powers of the United States under the Articles of Confederation? So what are you going to look for before we even read these choices? What are you going to look for if they're saying something about Hamilton, who we know is pro-Constitution? So we're going to look for something that shows what? Ephraim.
He shows something that is against the Articles of Confederation, or like I don't know what's the best way to say this, but something that one of the weaknesses he addresses in the Confederation Articles, basically.
Yeah, that they were weak and they have weaknesses. Okay, so let's see if we have one like that. The United States should not engage in diplomacy with foreign countries. B, the United States was not empowered to raise sufficient money for the government. C, the United States could act without the unanimous consent of the states. D, the United States was able to raise military forces sufficient to defend the country. Okay, so which is the one that shows some weakness? Sarah.
I would say C immediately shows the most weakness because the entire point of the Articles of Confederation was to get the states to unanimously consent to ratifying the Constitution.
Ooh, well, C says the United States could act without the unanimous consent of the states.
Mm-hmm.
Did you miss that? That's what we're looking for, what claims Hamilton is making about the Articles of Confederation. Is he saying that the US could act under the Articles of Confederation without the unanimous consent of the states? Joshua, what do you think?
I think it was B, that it was not empowered to raise sufficient money.
Mm-hmm. The boring answer, right? Right, that's it. Yeah, but, and I think, Sarah, though, you bring up inadvertently a very good point that it can be very, these words that negate what's being said are so easy to ignore because you think they're meaning one thing and you read it, you hear it in your head in that way, and it can be really hard to look back and say, wait a minute, wait, this is actually saying the opposite. So yeah, tricky.
Yeah,
So,
I thought it said couldn't.
yes, exactly. And that is so easy to do. And as Mr. Heimler is fond of saying, on exam day, you will be stupid. You'll be a little stressed. And so you really have to, and on the digital exam, you'll all be doing the digital exam. There will be ways that you can highlight and keep the highlighting there. And boy, I would really recommend that, especially for these things that negate statements, so that you can really see it, because it's going to be really hard when you're trying to move quickly and all that. That's like here, you'd want to put not empowered, not engaged, you'd want to really emphasize those. All the negative words are really important to keep an eye on. Okay. Hamilton claimed in the excerpt that state sovereignty, who can give us a definition kind of off the top of their head of sovereignty? What does that mean? Tabitha.
Sovereignty would be the power of a state or nation to rule over itself.
So state sovereignty would be state power, states' rights, as would be called later. Sebastian, you have something else to add there?
Yeah, sovereignty is not just autonomy. Like Spain has several, like 18 actually, autonomous regions which make their own laws and stuff, but are ultimately accountable to Spain. Like Spain can intervene and change things. Absolute sovereignty means that there is no one who outranks you in your government system.
Yeah.
Well,
but
I don't know if he
honcho.
meant total sovereignty here.
Right. Very good. Very good. Okay. So let's look at the answers. A. So Hamilton claimed in the excerpt that state sovereignty, which would be given under the Articles of Confederation, they are independent states. A. Increased the unity of the United States. B. Guaranteed Americans the protection of their liberties. C. Encouraged Americans to pursue the common good in politics. D. Allowed states to ignore the requests of the central government. Which one's the most negative? How about Sonnet and then Sebastian? You unmute. There you go.
I think it's D, because it was talking about a lot about that. And it definitely wasn't A because it didn't increase the unity of the United States. And then state sovereignty, it kind of does protect their liberties, but that's not what Hamilton was like emphasizing in his passage.
Right.
Yeah.
Same
with C, he wasn't really emphasizing that.
I mean, there were people, and we'll be reading some things by them. There were people who supported the articles. They thought they were fine. They thought they were good. And they would emphasize that, hey, this protected our liberties much better than this new tyrannical constitution idea, which is going to be the end of democracy as we know it. But yeah, so it allowed them to ignore the requests. Okay, I know we're getting kind of late here. I don't want to keep you much longer. How about 5-10 more minutes? Which of the following overall arguments did Hamilton make about the Articles of Confederation? A, the United States should invite other countries to ally with it under the terms of the Articles. B, Americans should adopt the Articles as the Constitution of the United States. Well, we already had. C, Americans should donate money to Congress because of flaws in the Articles. D, the United States should abandon the Articles and form a stronger central government. So which is his argument? Sebastian. Or Julian's got his hand up.
It seems pretty obviously D, because like again, Hamilton is not a fan of the Articles. Why
Oh dear. For me, Sebastian is fading away, freezing up. But yeah, he's not a fan of the Articles, so he wants a stronger government. Okay.
not only
Okay. Sebastian, you're picking up the bane of Zoom. Okay, let's do one more.
I think Hamilton is
He's still
just to ask.
Goodbye, Sebastian. Okay, let's do this last one here. Which of the following was a piece of evidence Hamilton used to support his argument in the excerpt? You know, you're always having to look on all your own APUSH essays. What is your evidence? A, earlier attempts to form associations of states in Europe had failed. B, and here the Articles of Confederation was basically the sort of association idea. He's saying this is just like those associations, okay? Sort of associations of friendship, that sort of thing. The United States had the authority to mandate funding under the Articles of Confederation. Some people believed, oh, here, I can push this over. Some people believed that the states would agree to follow the congressional directives. D, states sometimes needed to form alliances to achieve shared goals. Anyone have an idea there on what piece of evidence Hamilton tried to bring in? Ephraim, you look like you're raising your hand. Take it away.
Basically, I remember like prior he used a mention about how European states had allied and that they failed.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he's addressing how if a state has more powers and they ally, it wouldn't work. That's what I got from the talk.
Yeah, I think you're right that he was saying, hey, this Articles was just like those dumb associations that they were trying all over Europe that didn't work. And it doesn't, these associations of friendship, just relying on goodwill, but had no, push behind them, no deep commitment behind them. Okay. But you can see some themes. Let's just read this document here, and then I'm going to let you kids go to sleep or to dinner. Okay, this is John Dickinson, a delegate from Delaware, summary of a speech at the Constitutional Convention from the notes of James Madison in 1787. James Madison was kind of the guy in charge at the Constitutional Convention, or the guy kind of orchestrating things from behind. And he took it upon himself every night. He would take notes during the day, and everyone's giving their little speeches on what they thought was the right thing to do. And he then would write them up. And those are the documents we have, because these were just off the cuff speeches that people were giving during the day. And he would write them all up, and then he didn't publish them. He purposely did not publish them for many years, like, I don't know, 25, 30 years later, he published them because they viewed it as dirty laundry. You know, this will not be helpful to our nation to publish them. I can't remember if it was like, after I die, you can publish them or what, but, you know, someone might want to look up something on that, but they did not publish them right away. But it's a treasure trove now for historians, but nothing else was written. And you probably have seen in various things, they basically locked the people in, and they wouldn't allow any reporters or any outside people to come in during the deliberations. They kept the windows closed so that people from outside couldn't listen to the Constitutional Convention. And it was in the middle of the summer, and they were all dying of the heat and wearing probably 5 layers of clothing. So they were all pretty miserable, but okay, let's look at this. So this is Dickinson. The preservation of the states, and by this he's going to mean the 13 original states. The preservation of the states in a certain degree of agency is indispensable. It will produce that collision between the different authorities which should be wished for in order to check each other. To attempt to abolish the states altogether would degrade the councils of our country, would be impracticable, would be ruinous. John Dickinson compared the proposed national system to the solar system, in which the states were the planets, and the federal government would be in the position of what? The sun. In which the states were the planets and ought to be left to move freely in their proper orbits. If the state governments were excluded from all agency in the national one, and all power drawn from the people at large, the consequence would be that the national government would move in the same direction as the state governments now do, and would run into all the same mischiefs or troubles. Let's erase this here. So this is going to be a continuing problem for our nation. What is the role of the states in the federal government? I mean, this is going to go all through. The Civil War is fought in part over this. And it's tricky because which came first? The colonies that were separate or the national government? Sebastian, do you have a thought? Your hand is up.
I think Dickinson makes a good point,
Mhm.
but his simile is kind of terrible because
Planets.
first, planets don't have any agency in the workings of the solar system. If you took all the planets out of the solar system, the sun would get along just fine and wouldn't run into any of the same mischiefs because it's the sun and millions of times bigger and hotter and more immune to asteroids.
Interesting. Very good point.
Bad metaphor, but good point.
Yeah. But I think, that even using that metaphor shows, okay, we're in the Copernican world. Galileo has been, is no longer, his ideas are no longer being persecuted by the Catholic Church or anyone. This is just, everyone accepts this. So it's interesting, Newton has been developing his laws in physics. So it is just kind of an interesting natural type of view here. Okay, let's see if any of those. And, you know, it's just like that sort of, I mean, it is an interesting thing. I think a lot of times these wrong answers, or even the questions brought up here, they really bring up like, oh yeah, our history could have gone differently. They could have, at the Constitutional Convention, said, you know, these states, we just don't need states at all, do we? We can just be one country. We have one government, and that's it. You know, we have some local governments to handle roads and, you know, regulations for towns, but we don't need state governments. We can do away with them completely. And do you think anyone would have agreed to that? Might have, you know, I'm sure there were some who kind of wanted to do that.
There were some, but there was a very large faction that was against it.
Yeah.
It does seem like, yeah, the Federalists might have liked that.
Right. And yeah, it's, you know, habit and customs are powerful things, and things that you've done for several hundred years already are powerful things. And people were still not quite identifying fully as Americans rather than Virginians or Pennsylvanians. So it's tricky.
Interesting.
Mhm.
My summer book reading was Looking Backward, which was published in
Right.
1888 by a socialist named Edward Bellamy, and in it, his main character
Mhm.
falls asleep in Boston in 1887 and gets transported to and sleeps for 113 years due to some complicated circumstances, and gets transported to Boston in the year 2000,
Right.
which, and America is now a socialist utopia. And basically, and one of the things they do is they do abolish the state governments they had for
Interesting.
decades before
Yeah.
the main character woke up, because socialism is just a big central government and they had no more need for states.
Right. And he
So
presents
there was an
that
opportunity
in
to do
that
it.
sort of fantasy novel. It's a fascinating little book. He presents it as, oh, it was just everyone sort of got enlightened, and it was everyone just completely accepted, and it was peaceful, totally peaceful transition. But I can't imagine in the real world that that sort of thing would ever be a peaceful transition. You know, it just wouldn't be. And okay. Well, I think we need to stop here. Thank you all for being here. And I really appreciate it. Aiden, did you get to say anything tonight? Do you have any closing remarks you want to? I want to get you your full extra 100 points since you came tonight and took part. Do you have any things you want to say about any of these questions? Don't mean to put you on the spot, Aiden. I'm just trying to get you your points.
Not really. I just forgot everything I know about history.
Okay, that can happen. We don't want that to happen on the APUSH exam day. So this is, but thank you very much for coming, Aiden. And okay, so we'll see you not next Monday. We have that's our one night of the unit off. And then I'll see you all in 2 weeks here. Same time, same place, same link.
Hi.
Make it, Sarah. Okay, so long. Glad you could get here, Julian. Did you not play soccer tonight?
Thank you. No, it got canceled because we had a tournament this weekend. So
Okay. Well, good. We're glad you got to come. That's great. Say hi to your brothers. Okay, bye-bye.
okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mr. Richman. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, Mrs. Richman.
Bye-bye.
Hi.
Hey there. Hi, Rachel.
Hi. Sorry, I snuck into class.
I'm glad you did. You're always
I was
welcome.
wondering, so next week I'm having like a DBQ session again.
Oh,
We're gonna
great.
go over how to find like the nuances
Oh, great. Do you want to do that like
in them
next
quickly
Monday
and how to
night?
get the background point.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Um,
Oh.
we're doing that next Tuesday at 9.